Hi guys, well this is quite rare. This is a day come with me. I don't know if I've ever done one of these before. I'm gonna go see the Nightingale during the day. If you haven't heard about the Nightingale, it's an Australian movie and it's actually based in Tasmania. That's where it's shot. It's set in 1925 and it's about an Irish convict who gets brutalized by a British officer and then kind of goes on a rampage through the wilderness for revenge. So it's a revenge flick. And on the way, she meets this Aboriginal tracker who helps her, I guess, get revenge, I think. I feel like the trailer gives away a lot of this film, and I've been kind of watching it with like one eye open when it plays in the cinema. But I also feel like a lot of us know what happens in this film because it had a huge controversy. Usually I don't do a lot of non-horror movies, but when I do, it has to be something that's very disturbing because you know that's what my channel is about. This one is adventure, thriller, drama, I believe. It's actually not considered a horror, but the reason I am doing it is because it's written and directed by the same director of the Babadook, which is Jennifer Kent, an Australian. I know this is going to be completely different to the Babadook. Obviously the Babadook is a horror movie, but it should be interesting because of the controversy that surrounds this film. A lot of people actually walked out of the cinema when they went and saw this film because of how brutal it is. It is starring a female lead and it's about revenge, so I'm sure you guys can put together what happens and why people left because of the brutality. There's actually a quote, but I'm not going to chuck it up just because I know it could be a spoiler. I think it's very obvious, but there was a quote. Someone was quoted who left the cinema, why they left the cinema, and it kind of made headlines around Australia at least because it was so brutal. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to be. It's going to be really hard to watch. And then also with Australian history, which is very dark. If you don't know much about Australian history, it's the worst. It's the worst. I don't want to get into it that much, but it is bad. So I'm ready to feel mega guilty and also watch someone be totally brutalized. This should be a film. I believe it goes for just over 2 hours as well. A lot of films have been going over 2 hours lately. Obviously I've seen Midsummer twice, and I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I'll talk about in my favorites, and that was over 2.5 hours, and now this one's over 2 hours. Man, I've spent so many hours in the cinema this week, but I'm not complaining about it. I'm actually pretty excited. Okay, let's go check out The Nightingale and see if it's as brutal and as controversial as everyone's making it out to be. Let's go. Hi guys, I just got back from watching The Nightingale. Sorry, it is about to rain, so hopefully you can't hear any of that, but I do think this is probably the best lighting I've ever had in a Come With Me because it's in the middle of the day. That movie was extreme. This is about an Irish convict woman called Claire and a Aboriginal tracker named Billy, and they are tracking down this group of men who have brutalized their lives, really. It seemed like the film was going to be very predictable, and it turns out it wasn't so much. Something that you really need to understand about this film is it's not really a revenge film. It's about PTSD. It's about the effects and the victims and how they carry that. So it was quite haunting in that regard. The film is said by Jennifer Kent, who wrote and directed the film, to be authentic and honest, and I have to agree. They did a lot of research before doing this film about the history in Tasmania, and they also had some elders of the land where they shot this contributing with the story, and they were happy to go along with it, and they approved of the messages. This film is very important to watch because it is the dark history I was talking about before about Australia, and it's showing it in an authentic way. It is not allowing you to be comfortable on purpose. It's meant to be about the injustice done in the world, and yeah, really just history and how people were treated.
This movie definitely has some unexpected turns and twists, and I really liked that. It did go for over 2 hours, but I think it was really important for the two main characters to really be developed, and you learned a lot along the way. I really liked that Billy kind of stood up just as much as Claire in this movie, where, you know, she's on the poster, you know, even the blurb says it's about her, and I felt like in the end it was actually about him, which I really enjoyed, and I think that that was such an important story to tell. The film is completely and utterly brutal. The most brutal thing I've seen in the cinema in a very long time. It is not for the faint-hearted, and people were warned before the movie started. They had someone come up and talk, and they were warned about the graphic images. It's actually not yet rated in Australia because that was a media screening. They were warned about how brutal it was, and if they wanted to walk out, they could. So that's how extreme it is. And I will say that. Is it extreme in every single sense of the word? Yeah, it was awful, some of the parts. I cried through a lot of it. But in saying all of that, it was beautifully shot, and it's the story, it's hard to say it's beautiful, but the way it came together was really soulful, and a lot of thought was put into it. I loved the idea of the nightingale bird and the blackbird, and it wrapped it up very well. I would say that the imagery was probably one of the best parts, with the wilderness, as they call it. I would call it like a forest, and I think that it was just shot beautifully, and the soundscape of the nature in the background was just lovely. It's something very different that I have not seen a film like this in a long time. I try and stay away from like historic movies, and I'm not saying historic Australian movies. I just don't gel with anything from the 17th or 18th century. I like more modern stories, more relatable stories. So every once in a while when I see a film like this, it's really good because it reminds me how important, you know, the history is to reflect on. Something else I need to touch on is the language. I was just talking about this in my recent live Does This Offend You episode, about the C word that Australia tends to use a lot, and in this film is no different. That was quite surprising and quite authentic, and very interesting that, you know, 200 years ago it was the same language as we're using today. I didn't realize how much of the same slang we had, and I thought that was really interesting. But again, if that offends you, this whole film is full of just really dark things, and the language, when you compare that to like the kind of brutality that these people went through, it's nothing. Like, words are words, and I know people are going to be offended by the word, but when you watch this film you really will put it all in perspective. I thought that the film was casted really well, and I imagine it's really awful to play these kind of roles if you're, you know, the bad guy in the situation, but Baykali, who I hope I pronounced that right, plays Billy, was definitely a standout for me. And the interesting thing about him is that this is his first film, this is his first feature film, this is his first any time on screen. So hats off, because his performance will, yeah, tear you apart. He was amazing, and yeah, I really loved it. I thought that this film was really interesting, because it's one of those films that you can't really say that you liked. A lot of people were scared to say whether they liked or disliked Midsummer. I know I need to shut up talking about it, but a lot of people kept saying that. But this is one of the films that you really feel bad if you say you enjoyed it. I wouldn't say I enjoyed this film, but I think it's an important film. It was excruciating in parts. I just said I was crying throughout the film. It's hard to reflect on, and it's easy to just kind of whisk away, but it is something that should stay with you, and you should think about just a little bit at least. But it is a very hard watch. But I do think it was a very strong and soulful movie, and yeah, I really did like it in that respect. I thought it was really well put together. I am going to give it a 7 out of 10. I just felt like it went for a little bit too long to be an 8 for me. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I can't wait to see what other people have to say about this, especially people who aren't from Australia, because there's things I don't think that they would realise in the film. When you hear the weird noises in the background, that's a Tasmanian devil, by the way, if you didn't know that. This was a very interesting film to go see at an appropriate time, because it doesn't come out in Australia until the 29th of August. And luckily for me, my friend MJ, she let me come with her. So thank God I got to see it before other people spoke about it. But it is a very brutal film, and when I say brutal, I mean brutal, guys. I feel like I'm desensitized to a lot of things, and I don't say when I'm saying I'm desensitized, I'm not saying it with like a badge of honor. A lot of people say, you know, oh my god, nothing scares me, but it's desensitized in a way that you see something bad happen and you don't feel for it because you're like, oh, it's just a movie. And I've seen a lot of really intense things, and there's a couple movies which I probably will get to. There's a movie beginning with S, which I have not spoken about because of this. Not that I'm desensitized to it, but there is a couple of films that affect me. And I definitely say that this movie reminded me that I am human, and I'm definitely not completely desensitized because it really hit me hard. I would recommend going to see this film totally to everyone. It's an important part of history and misjustice that happened, and it's a story. Although it's not really a lesson, it's something that we just need to know. And especially you guys, I think there's 95% of you who are not from Australia. I think it's really important for you to go and see this and, you know, even just have a crack at understanding the dark history that we hold. And yeah, I think history needs to be learnt to not be repeated. And this is just a really, really sad story, but an interesting one at that. I'm gonna leave it here. That was a very downbeat ending to how I began. I hope you guys are having a great day. If you did find this interesting, please give it a thumbs up, and I promise my next video will be more upbeat. That's what I thought of the Nightingale. I do recommend you guys go see it in cinemas, especially if you can stomach it. And if you walk out, Jennifer Kent said herself that she would not blame you for not enjoying it. It's not a film that's meant to be enjoyed. It's just a story that needs to be told. I'm going to end it there. I'll talk to you guys very soon. Stay spooky. Bye.